So I joined, Bankers Trust in '93, and I got on the trading desk. Again, one of those big floors that they were like, here's the trading floor. And it was impressive. It was massive, and there was 300 people there, and it was the size of a football field, and people screaming about foreign exchange and treasury bonds, and we were in the derivatives desk. But I was taught at age 22, what we do is we rip as much money out of our clients as possible. Actually, out of anybody we can, our colleagues, our clients, anybody.
It's cutthroat.
It's cutthroat, and the more the merrier. And so it's like, you can make $1 million on that trade, make 10 million on that trade. And it was this culture, and I used to describe it as people as if I grew up in a family where I saw my dad beat my mom, then I would probably beat my girlfriend. It was like, it was just this thing where it wasn't questioned, and you watched it happen, and then you just assumed that's the way life was. Until later you go back and you're like, why am I doing this? And is it the right thing to do? And Bankers Trust famously got sued by a company, and then sued by a few companies, and then they hit him with the RICO, which was used to take Al Capone down. Yeah, it was a racketeering, because they proved that Bankers Trust had done the same criminal act to multiple companies, just like the mob did. And so, which tripled the damages, which back then was a lot of money. These days, people pay billion-dollar settlements, but back then, they remember Procter & Gamble had sued Bankers Trust for $77 million, and it tripled on the RICO stats. So all of a sudden, they were looking at a few $100 million. And it was like real money, and people were panicking. But the culture didn't necessarily change. And so back to you. What did you see happening when you started talking about it? And then, has it changed? Will it ever change?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started talking about, so this was now 2002 to like 2004, I had my first nonfiction book came out, which was called Other People's Money, The Corporate Mugging of America. And it was all about Enron and WorldCom and banking and my time at Goldman. I mean, it was very, I think I've become a clearer writer over the years, so it was probably more technical than it might have been had I written it now. But it was sort of my first foray out into that and explaining what was going on. And I remember one of the chapters, I talked about credit derivatives, and I talked about that competition, and I talked about, that sort of striving to be the one who can get credit for that trade, so that you can be the one to get the biggest bonus, or to climb up the ladder the quickest, or to be in favor with the senior person who's doing the same thing, and so forth. And I wrote about all that, and I also wrote about how I hadn't thought anything had changed at that point in the couple years since Enron and WorldCom. So you have these massive scandals, you have complicity of the banks, investigations in Washington and throughout the city of London and so forth for the international components of it. And then it just kind of faded. So then I wrote this book about it, and at the time, I was like, it hadn't faded, because some of the exact types of securities I had been working with, instruments like financial things inside the firms that I had been working with, are now more and more dangerous, because there's less transparency. People don't know how they actually behave. They could be at the crux of a crisis. And then a few years later, we have the financial crisis. So that entire period, even though there'd been all this fraud in 2001, 2002, it was exposed, it was investigated, not a lot changed. And then, you get into a period 2004 to 2007 where there's this extra buildup of other types of fraud and risk in the financial system and with respect to banks. And then you have this crisis. So nothing changed during that period, even though there was a couple years of looking into it. And then since the financial crisis, I don't think a lot has changed either. What happened post the financial crisis was we had a lot of central banks, so the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, all these sort of larger monolithic institutions who can sort of create money, or what they call liquidity, going back to the ocean and the sharks, basically feeding, pool of money into the banking system to kind of help them paper over a lot of the losses they incurred for the entire world. And as a result, there wasn't a lot of change to these banks, because all they really got for creating a financial crisis was money. And so if you give a lot of money to a group of people who basically lost a lot of money, they're not even. They're not going to change, and there hasn't been a lot of change, I don't think, in the cultures as a result of that. And so now we're 11 years after the financial crisis. We could see another one, could see in a year and 2 years and 3 years, whatever it might be, because nothing has changed.
Right.
I think that we're starting the beginning of a prolonged period now of a recession or even worse.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. I recently sat down with Nomi Prins, the former Wall Street trader you would have seen on Fox, CNBC, and Bloomberg Television. She regularly advises the Federal Reserve, IMF, and World Bank on important financial policy matters.
I've realized over the years that people don't have the same exposure to trading systems on Wall Street. And so I looked at what are some of the ways that I can create something that regular people on the ground can use to access some of what Wall Street does all the time.
We had an incredible conversation, but what really stood out to me is her brand new 25-cent contract strategy, designed to leverage a little-known market anomaly that happens every day around 10 a.m., if you know what to look for.
The more comfortable you feel with financial elements, the better you'll be at managing them, and the more confident and empowered you'll be in your own life in any aspect of your life, not just with respect to money.
Now, as a former Wall Street trader, I am super excited to share this investment strategy for the very first time. As the host of this episode, I'm able to offer you exclusive rights to a seat at her 25-cent contract live training. But you must act now to secure your spot. So click on the link below or go to londonreal.tv/Nomi, that's N-O-M-I, to secure your spot. And I will see you there.
I myself, my graduate degrees are in statistics and operations research, undergrad in math. So that was always, yes, my kind of angle into Wall Street relative to trading or sales, which was some of the other types of jobs on Wall Street. It was always about the math, the trends, the numbers, the securities, and how they behaved under certain conditions. And that's always what I looked at throughout my entire career on Wall Street. And I always also looked at the downside, not what happens if a trade works, but what happens if it doesn't work. What are the risks you should be looking for, and how can you best, sort of protect that investment for those risks? And so that's what they're a very cheap way of taking an investment into the market, particularly in times of volatility, that take into account what the big sharks are doing, that take into account why volatility is happening, and presents a way for a person to take advantage of that scenario in a cheap way, and in a fast way, and in an easy way.